Hello, my name is Reverend Andrew Taylor Peck, and I'm the senior pastor at Trinity United Church of Christ in Canton, Ohio. Today's scripture comes from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 7, verse 36 through chapter 8, verse 3. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and took his place at the table. And a woman in the city, who was a sinner, having learned that he was eating in the Pharisee's home, brought an alabaster jar of ointment. She stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and began to bathe his feet with her tears and to dry them with her hair. Then she continued kissing his feet and anointing them with ointment. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw it, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what kind of woman this was who is touching him, that she is a sinner." Jesus spoke up and said to him, "Simon, I have something to say to you." "Teacher," he replied, "speak." A certain creditor had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debts of both of them. Now which of them will love him more? Simon answered, "I suppose the one for whom he canceled the greater debt." And Jesus said to him, "You have judged rightly." Then turning towards the woman, he said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. Hence she has shown great love, but the one to whom little is forgiven loves little." Then he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." But those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, "Who is this that even forgives sins?" And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Today's story is one of the most powerful texts in all of the gospel scriptures. It is a story about forgiveness, about valuing everyone in our society, and about the importance of seeing people for who they really are. This is a story about seeing beyond labels and seeing into the very heart and minds of us all. This is a story about shame and embarrassment, and about Jesus cutting right through all of that to get to the core of our identities as redeemed, forgiven children of God. This is a story about Jesus responding to yet one more, quote, sinner with compassion and grace. This is one more story where Jesus calls out the religious authorities, the learned people, for excluding others from forgiveness and compassion. When I was living in Memphis, Tennessee a few years ago, I came across another story that reminded me of today's scripture. This story was about a man named DeAndre Brown, but most of us probably wouldn't call him by that name. Since he left prison in 2005, he's been known by these other names: criminal, ex-convict. Those names cost him his contract with a commercial cleaning agency. After DeAndre lost his job at the company, his name changed again. He got a new set of names: penniless, homeless, worthless. He could not get a job in Memphis workforce because of his past, because of his names. Criminal, they called him. Sinner. You can imagine as he went through his life, his shoulders became more and more slumped as the names weighted down upon him, as the shame took over, and as he felt that he was, in fact, nothing more than a worthless ex-convict criminal. But the good news is DeAndre changed his own life. He took matters into his own hands, and he formed a faith-based organization called Lifeline in order to get a job. And to this day, DeAndre works with other ex-convicts all over the city of Memphis who have been shut out of the system because of their past. DeAndre and his organization Lifeline have helped all these people getting new jobs, cleaning up abandoned lots, and working in the city. All these folks have been shut out of the workforce before DeAndre talked to them because of the labels they have been called: armed robber, abuser, convict, thief. Names, you see, have the power to paralyze us with shame and embarrassment. Names have the power to make us crumple to our knees, a broken people. The woman in today's scripture comes to Jesus in this way, shamed, embarrassed, crumpled to her knees. We don't know exactly what she has done, how she has sinned, but we do know that she is known publicly for her sin. Simon the Pharisee labels her as a sinner, and we can see that she has been called that name for years. We can get a small glimpse into her life by her actions of gratitude towards Jesus once he has forgiven her. Now, in this room, in this church, in this congregation, I bet we all have been called names that break our hearts, that break our spirits. We all have been called names that cause us to slump our shoulders forward in shame. Whether those names are addict, abuser, victim, divorcee, cheater, gambler, widow, or loner. Those names sometimes hang over us like heavy burdens, pushing us closer and closer to the ground. Sometimes it seems like no matter what we do to shed the burdens of those names, we cannot shake them. Whether we're avoiding school dances or gym class, or whether we've been shut out of the workforce. Or maybe, just maybe, these shameful names, these labels that we have internalized keep us from having relationships with friends. These names and the shame that they bring are just a part of the brokenness of our world. But Jesus sees our true identity, not the names that we have been called or the labels that have been placed on us by society. And central to today's story, today's scripture, is a woman who is a, quote, sinner. When Simon calls her that, you know that he thinks she is unworthy of being seen, of being known, of being spoken to, or even acknowledged. Simon the Pharisee has invited Jesus over for dinner, and this unwelcome guest arrives. This woman, this sinner, comes in, and Simon looks down his nose at her, if he sees her at all. And he looks down his nose at Jesus, when Jesus does not rebuke her, and when he graciously accepts the extravagant love and welcome that she shows to him. We can all imagine this woman coming in the door of Simon's house. We can imagine her with her shoulders slumped forward from years of shame and embarrassment. We can imagine that she only sees herself as sinner, as shameful. But Jesus sees her differently. Do you see this woman? He says to Simon. He does not call her sinner. He labels her. He gives her a name. He calls her woman. Then he goes on to define the woman for her acts of love, not for her sins. Now, for Simon, in some ways, this is a very literal question. For even though Simon can't miss the party crasher, he does not think she is even worthy of acknowledgement. Therefore, he doesn't even see her. Previously in the text, she's been labeled as sinner. But Jesus reframes how she is seen by mentioning the good and faithful actions that she has taken. You see, once again, Jesus is equalizing the playing field. He says to Simon, you're not as great as you think you are. And he says to the woman, you're not as bad as you've been told you are. Her great faith is shown in her act of courage. Her act of courage, which is entering the room as a known sinner. She enters the room of Simon the Pharisee and serves Christ despite her reputation in this town. One of my heroes and mentors is a theologian and current head of Luther Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. His name is David Lose. He's an author and a blogger, and I have been reading his work for many years. It was wonderful that I got to actually meet him last month in Atlanta at the Festival of Homiletics. In the middle of his talk, he described going to Good's Dairy in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, my hometown. I couldn't believe it. Here it was, my hero was actually from the same town that I was, so I was completely geeking out. And Sarah and I, my wife, waited in line to talk to him after his talk. I got up there to speak with him and found out that he grew up just a few blocks away from where I did. Went to the same elementary school and junior high school that I did. It was a great connection to make. I'm sure he thought I was a little bit strange, maybe a stalker, but for me it was wonderful. David Lose claims that this is his favorite scripture in all of the Gospels. He says it's his favorite scripture because it cuts to the essence and the core of Jesus' ministry, which is to free us from the shame and the labels that we have placed upon ourselves. Through his forgiveness, he frees the woman to be seen again as a human being, as a beloved child of God. This is why he loves this scripture so much, and this is the essence and the core of what Jesus was talking about with Simon the Pharisee. In this scripture, Jesus frees the woman from her shame. Jesus frees the woman from her titles and her label as sinner. We can imagine the scene. The prominent member of society, Simon the Pharisee, has asked Jesus, this itinerant preacher, this person who is getting all the buzz, to his house. He has invited him over for dinner, and you can imagine there were many other guests in attendance. This was some of the best and the brightest of the day, coming to hear and see what Jesus had to offer. And then in the middle of this fancy dinner party, this lowly woman, this sinner, enters the house. This sinner enters the house and interrupts this carefully planned dinner party. This woman comes, and Jesus pays more attention to her than Simon the Pharisee. Jesus calls out Simon and lifts her up. This woman interrupts the dinner party and thanks Jesus lavishly for forgiving her, for this forgiveness has set her free. In this forgiveness from Christ, she has been given back her name, her dignity, and her freedom from shame. Jesus has restored her relationship with God by forgiving her, by reminding her that she is a human being worthy and valuable. He has released her from her shame, and therefore she reacts with extravagant acts of love. This is the way that David Lose puts it. Forgiveness gives you back yourself. Shame takes over when we live determined by the labels and the names that we have been given. We are no longer able to live our lives freely. When we decide that we are no more or no less than what we've done, the mistakes we've made, the debt that we owe, the labels we have been given, the names we have been called. But when we are forgiven through Christ, all those limitations disappear and we are restored, renewed, and set free. So this is a story about forgiveness, but it's also about the gratitude that forgiveness creates. It's about the extravagant acts of love that we do in response to that gratitude. But it's also about something else. It's about the hardness of heart as opposed to love. It's about judgment instead of forgiveness. And it's about a sense of entitlement instead of gratitude. After lifting up and freeing the woman, Jesus goes on to compare her actions of extravagant hospitality with that of Simon's lack of hospitality. He changes his focus from her devotion to Simon's neglect. It's not that Simon would have been expected to wash Jesus' feet with his tears. It's that her extravagance only magnifies Simon's lack of hospitality. He did not even provide the minimum of what a good host would normally offer a guest. Jesus says to him, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but she has not stopped kissing my feet from the moment that I arrived. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet." After lifting up and freeing the woman, Jesus goes on to compare her extravagant actions with the lack of welcome and hospitality that Simon chose. It's not that Jesus would have expected Simon to wash his feet with his tears, but the woman's extravagance only highlights the lack of what Simon didn't even offer to Jesus. He gave him no welcoming kiss, did not anoint his head with oil, which would have been expected of house guests, and he did not even offer him water to wash his dusty feet. The contrast between the two cannot be understated. Jesus in this scripture is speaking to all of us to remind us that the proper response to this forgiveness that he offers is like the woman's, extravagant. And to remind us that we should not be like Simon, thinking we have it all figured out, looking down our nose at other people and not responding to this wonderful gift from Christ with any kind of hospitality. May this story remind us that our response to this forgiveness so freely offered from Christ is to be extravagantly loving towards him, worshipful towards God, and may we remember that we need to give this forgiveness to others. May it be so. Amen. Thank you for watching.